I still remember the way they laughed that day. Their voices echoed through the hallway, sharp and careless, like the sound of a door slamming shut forever. "Let's see if he survives without us," one of them said. I smiled faintly, pretending not to hear. Maybe they were right. Maybe they thought I needed them more than they needed me. What they didn't know was that I had already survived so much. Loneliness, loss, and the quiet ache of watching love fade from people who once called me Dad, with warmth in their voice. After they left, the house fell silent, the kind of silence that sits heavy in the chest. Every creak of the floor reminded me that the laughter I once loved had turned into something cold. I made coffee the next morning just like I used to, but the cups on the table stayed empty. I kept their photos in the same old frames, dusting them off every Sunday, hoping one day they'd come back. It's funny how we spend our lives giving everything to our children, and when they grow up, we become just a chapter they'd rather skip. But I wasn't angry. No, anger is too heavy for an old heart. Instead, I decided to teach them one last lesson, quietly, patiently, like I used to when they were little and stubborn. For years, I had saved every penny I could. Not for myself, but for them. I never told anyone. I fixed other people's fences, repaired roofs, sold old furniture, anything that brought a few extra dollars. Every coin had a story, and every story was meant for them. I wanted them to know that real wealth isn't in money. It's in loyalty, gratitude, and love. But since they no longer listened, I had to let life teach them instead. The day I went to the lawyer's office, the air smelled like rain. I handed over the sealed envelope with trembling hands and smiled. "They'll understand one day," I whispered. Inside that envelope was not just a will, it was a map, a message, and a test. I didn't leave them everything at once. I made sure they'd only receive it after finding their way back home, because I didn't want them to inherit money. I wanted them to rediscover the value of a father's love. Now I sit here, on the old porch, watching the sun set behind the same hills I once taught them to climb. The world feels quiet, but not empty anymore. Sometimes the birds still sing at dusk, and I like to imagine they carry my forgiveness with their wings. If you're listening to this story right now, maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe someone forgot your worth too. If my words touched you, stay a little longer. Subscribe to the channel and share these stories with someone who needs to be reminded that love, even when forgotten, never truly disappears. The morning after they left, I woke up to the sound of nothing. No laughter, no clinking dishes, no hurried footsteps rushing out the door. Just silence, and the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. It's strange how silence can make you remember everything you tried to forget. I looked around the kitchen, still set for 4, though only one chair would ever be used again. Their coffee cups were still there, their fingerprints fading from the glass. I sat down, took a deep breath, and whispered to the empty room, "You'll be fine, old man. You've been fine before." For a while, I tried to convince myself that they'd call, that maybe they just needed time. But days turned into weeks, and the only sound that broke the silence was the mailman's footsteps on the gravel. Bills, ads, nothing more. Not a letter, not even a text. It hurt, but I couldn't hate them. How could I? They were my children. I raised them the best I could, with worn hands and a hopeful heart. Maybe I didn't give them everything they wanted, but I gave them everything I had. So, I began to fill my days again. I fixed the squeaky door in the barn, painted the fence white, and cleaned the tools I hadn't touched in years. Work has a way of keeping the pain at a distance. In the evenings, I'd sit outside and watch the sun melt behind the trees, the sky turning golden like the days when they were still small and used to sit beside me, asking endless questions about the world. I missed those questions more than I could ever explain. One evening, as I was sorting through old boxes in the attic, I found an old family photo, one from the year their mother passed. We were standing in front of the house, all holding hands, smiling despite everything. I stared at it for a long time, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry. The kind of cry that doesn't ask for pity, just release. Because deep down, I realized something painful and true. They didn't just leave because they stopped loving me. They left because they couldn't bear to see what time had done to me. Still, I couldn't let bitterness take root. I made a promise to myself that night. I would keep living. Not for them, not even for myself, but for the hope that one day, when they're older, when the noise of life quiets down, they'll remember the man who never stopped waiting, the man who believed that love doesn't expire. It just changes form, waiting patiently to be found again. And every night, before I turn off the light, I whisper the same prayer. Keep them safe, wherever they are. And if it's meant to be, bring them home someday. I still remember the day everything started to make sense. The day I realized that what hurt me the most wasn't their absence, but the reason behind it. It wasn't that they didn't love me anymore. It was that they had forgotten what love truly means. You see, when money and pride slip into a family, they start changing the way people see each other. Love becomes a transaction. Affection turns into a memory. And somewhere in the noise of success and comfort, gratitude fades away. I watched it happen slowly, like rust eating through iron. When they were younger, we used to share everything: laughter, tears, stories around the dinner table. But as they grew older, life became about things. The newest phone, the bigger house, the fancy car. They wanted what the world told them to want, and I understood. I did. But with every step they took chasing more, they drifted further from what truly mattered. From family, from simplicity, from the heart that had once protected them from everything. I tried to warn them, but my words sounded old-fashioned. They'd smile politely, the way people smile when they think they already know everything. So I stopped talking and started listening, to the silence that followed, to the distance growing between us. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. One evening, I saw my youngest son arguing with his sister over an old watch that used to belong to their grandfather. It was worthless in money, but priceless in memory. They shouted, blamed, and stormed out, and I just stood there, holding that watch, feeling like time itself had betrayed me. That was the moment I realized. Greed had stolen the warmth from our home, and I had let it happen. That night, I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how easily people trade peace for possessions. I made a quiet vow, one I never shared with anyone. If my children had forgotten the meaning of love, I would remind them in a way they could never ignore. Not through lectures or tears, but through life itself. So I began to plan, not out of revenge, but out of hope. Hope that one day, when the noise of their world faded, they'd uncover the truth behind what I left for them. Not just in money, but in message. Because real wealth isn't measured in what you own, but in who you've loved, forgiven, and stood by when life got hard. And maybe, just maybe, when they discovered what I'd hidden for them, they'd finally understand. I wasn't trying to survive without them. I was teaching them how to live without losing what matters most. I remember the day I decided to start saving. Not because I wanted to be rich, I never cared about that, but because I wanted my children to have something more than I ever did. I grew up with empty pockets, but a full heart. My father used to say, "Son, money can fill your hands, but never your soul." I carried those words with me my whole life. So when I started putting away a few dollars here and there, I wasn't thinking about wealth. I was thinking about love. A kind of love that protects even when it's no longer seen. I worked long days fixing fences, mending roofs, and cleaning barns for neighbors half my age. They used to ask why I kept working when I should be resting. I'd just smile and say, "It keeps me alive." But truth is, I wasn't just working for myself. Every nail I hammered, every coin I tucked into that old metal box under the floorboards was for them, my children, my reason for everything. I remember how it started. Just a few coins from an extra job, then a few bills from selling some old furniture. Sometimes I skipped buying new clothes, or I'd fix my boots with tape to save a little more. Every sacrifice felt small compared to the image in my mind. Their faces smiling, their futures secure. I thought that if I left them something, maybe they'd never have to feel the same struggle I once did. Maybe they'd remember that their father's love was hidden not just in words, but in actions. Over the years, the box grew heavier, not just with money, but with memories. Each dollar carried the weight of a long day, of a backache, of a quiet dinner alone. I often imagined the day they'd find it, how surprised they'd be, how proud they'd feel. I wanted them to see that their old man, the one they thought had nothing, had been building something beautiful for them all along. But as time went on, I started to see that no amount of money could buy what we'd lost. Connection, laughter, understanding. I realized the box had become something else entirely. It was no longer just an inheritance. It was a message that said, "I never gave up on you. I was always thinking of you, even when you weren't thinking of me." Now, every night before I sleep, I picture that old box hidden beneath the wooden floor. It's not just a box of savings. It's a box of love, patience, and forgiveness, waiting for the day they come home. Because maybe then, when they open it, they'll understand that the greatest treasure a parent can give isn't money. It's proof that love never stopped working for them, even in silence. There's something about old photographs that can break a man's heart in the gentlest way. One rainy afternoon, I sat down with a box full of them. Yellowed edges, fingerprints long faded, but the memories still alive. Each picture was a doorway to a time when laughter came easily, when the house smelled of Sunday meals, and the sound of little feet running through the hallway filled the air. I could almost hear their voices again. I could almost feel their hugs. But then I'd blink, and all that warmth turned back into silence. I picked up one photo that always stopped me in my tracks. The four of us standing in front of the house, arms wrapped around each other. Their mother had the kind of smile that could heal you just by looking at it. The kids were small then, still clinging to my legs, full of dreams and questions about the world. Back then, I used to think time was my friend, that I had forever to watch them grow, to teach them right from wrong, to love them the way I never got to love my own parents. But forever has a way of ending quietly. After she passed, everything changed. The house felt colder, emptier. I tried to be both father and mother, but grief doesn't come with instructions. I did my best, even when my best wasn't enough. I cooked badly, burned toast, forgot birthdays sometimes, but my heart was always there, even if my hands failed me. I thought love would be enough to keep us together. I was wrong. People don't drift apart all at once. They fade, little by little, like ink on old paper. Holding that photo, I felt tears sting my eyes, the kind that come slow but heavy. I realized that love, real love, isn't always loud or perfect. Sometimes it's quiet. It waits. It forgives. It doesn't stop even when the other person walks away. And as I sat there, surrounded by the ghosts of happier days, I whispered to her, to their mother, that I was still trying, still keeping my promise to take care of them, even from afar. That's when it hit me. The savings I had hidden, the letters I wrote, the plans I made. They weren't just for my children. They were for her, too. A way to show her that the love we built didn't die with her. It just changed form. It became the air that still fills this house, the reason I keep the lights on, the faith that one day they'll come home and see what love built here. Sometimes I think she's still here, watching over us. Maybe that's why I still talk to her every night before bed. Because even if no one answers, it reminds me that love doesn't vanish. It just moves to a place where only the heart can reach. It was a cold morning when I saw my son again. Not in person, but on a newspaper cover. There he was, wearing a suit, standing beside people who looked nothing like the family we used to be. The headline said he had become one of the most successful real estate agents in the city. I smiled, but it wasn't pride that filled me. It was something quieter, something that hurt a little. Because while the world now called him a man of success, I still remembered the boy who used to fall asleep on my lap after a long day in the fields. I stared at that photo for a long time. His smile looked practiced, polished, the kind of smile that hides exhaustion, ambition, and maybe a little emptiness. I wondered if he ever thought about me, about this old house, about the evenings when we'd sit by the fire, eating soup his mother made. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. But as I looked at him there, surrounded by everything he thought he wanted, I whispered, "I hope it was worth it, son." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning over in bed, thinking about how success changes people, not just their lives, but their hearts. I used to believe hard work made you humble, that it taught you to value what really mattered. But somewhere along the way, people started believing that money was the proof of worth. My son wasn't a bad man. No, he was just lost in a world that praised everything I once warned him about. A few days later, I found an old letter he had written me when he was 12. The paper was wrinkled, the handwriting messy and innocent. It said, "Dad, when I grow up, I'll buy you a big house so you never have to work again." I laughed softly, the kind of laugh that aches more than it heals. He did buy that house, just not for me. Still, I couldn't blame him. Maybe life had pushed him too hard. Maybe he forgot where his dreams came from. But I knew one thing. No matter how far he ran, no amount of success could fill the space where love once lived. So, I prayed for him, not for more money or fame, but for peace. Because sometimes what we call winning is just a louder way of losing what matters most. As I folded that old letter and placed it back in the drawer, I felt something shift inside me. I realized that even if he never came back, even if he never said, "I'm sorry," I would still love him, not for who he became, but for who he once was. And maybe that's what being a parent really means, loving them even when they forget how to love you back. There comes a time in every parent's life when you stop waiting for apologies and start finding peace in the quiet. That moment came to me one evening as I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same table where we once shared everything: laughter, stories, and dreams. The wood was scratched and worn, like me. I ran my hand across it, feeling the grooves left by their childhood forks and crayons, and I realized something. This table had seen more love than anger, more beginnings than endings. That thought stayed with me as I began to understand what life had been trying to teach me all along. You can't force people to remember love the same way you do. Everyone carries it differently. My children thought love was comfort, money, gifts, safety. But for me, love was presence, being there, listening, forgiving even when it hurts. And though they had forgotten that, I knew it wasn't gone. It was just buried beneath the noise of their new lives. So I started to write. Every night before bed, I'd take out a notebook and fill it with letters I would never send. In those letters, I spoke to them, to the little versions of them that still lived somewhere deep inside. I wrote about the day they were born, the smell of rain on their hair when they ran in from the fields, the way they used to look at me when they needed help with their homework. I told them things I never found the courage to say out loud. How proud I was of them, how much I missed them, how I forgave them long before they ever knew they needed forgiveness. It became my ritual, my way of keeping them close. And slowly, something inside me changed. The bitterness that had lived in my chest began to fade, replaced by a strange kind of peace. The kind that doesn't come from forgetting, but from understanding. I realized that forgiveness isn't a gift you give someone else. It's a gift you give yourself, so your heart can breathe again. One night, as I finished another letter, I looked out the window and saw the moon rising behind the hills. It reminded me of their mother, gentle, constant, quietly watching over us all. I smiled and whispered, "They'll find their way back, one day." Not because I demanded it, but because I finally trusted that love, when it's real, has a way of returning. Not always in words or visits, but in the quiet pull that tugs at the soul when it remembers where it came from. And so I keep writing, not out of pain, but out of hope. Because love, when it's patient, doesn't just wait, it endures. I'll never forget the day I met the new neighbor, a young man named Daniel who moved into the house next door. He was polite, always with a kind smile, the kind that reminded me of my sons when they were still boys. One afternoon, he saw me struggling to carry a bag of firewood and came over to help. It was the first time in months someone had stepped through my gate. His presence filled the silence in a way I didn't know I needed. We talked for hours that day, sitting on the porch as the sun melted behind the trees. He told me about his job, his plans, his dreams. I told him about my family, though I tried not to sound bitter when I spoke their names. He listened, really listened, and something about his eyes told me he understood more than I said. Before he left, he smiled and said, "You remind me of my grandfather. He used to tell stories just like you." I laughed, and for a brief moment, I felt seen again. From that day on, Daniel started visiting often. Sometimes he brought me groceries, sometimes he just came for coffee and conversation. The house, once heavy with loneliness, began to breathe again. We'd sit outside under the stars, and he'd ask me questions about life, about love, about how to keep hope alive when everything falls apart. I told him the truth, that love isn't about never being hurt, but about choosing to care even after you've been broken. One evening, he brought his fiancée with him. Her name was Clara. Gentle eyes, kind voice. They reminded me so much of how my wife and I used to be, when the world still felt wide open. Watching them laugh together made something stir in me, something I thought I'd lost. Joy. It wasn't envy. It was gratitude. Gratitude that love still existed in the world, even if it no longer lived in my home the same way it once did. After they left that night, I sat in the quiet again, but this time it felt different. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. I realized that maybe God hadn't taken everything away from me. Maybe He was just teaching me to see love in new places, through new faces. As I closed the door and turned off the lights, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. For the first time in years, I looked alive. I whispered softly to myself, maybe love hasn't forgotten me after all. It just found another way to say hello. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I woke up earlier than usual. The world outside was still half asleep, wrapped in that soft light that makes everything feel almost sacred. I made my coffee, sat by the window, and watched the steam rise slowly from the cup. I used to share this view with my wife. She loved mornings like this, when the air was cool and the birds seemed to be whispering prayers. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel lonely. I just felt. As I sat there, I began thinking about all the things life had taken and all the things it had quietly given back. I had spent years chasing peace, believing it would come when my children returned or when old wounds healed. But that morning, I realized peace wasn't something that arrived. It was something you built little by forgiving, by letting go, by still choosing love, even when it no longer chooses you. I looked at the old bookshelf in the corner, the one my wife and I built together decades ago. It held everything we once were. Her favorite books, a cracked family photo, a few letters tied with a red ribbon. I took one of those letters and opened it. It was one she wrote me before she passed. The paper was fragile, but her words were alive. Promise me you won't let bitterness take root. Promise me you'll keep loving, no matter what. I had forgotten that line, and reading it again felt like she was sitting right beside me. I closed my eyes and whispered, I kept my promise. Not perfectly, but honestly. I realized then that love had never really left my house. It had just changed shape. It lived in the small things now, in the warmth of the sun through the window, in the laughter of the neighbors' kids, in the quiet hum of life continuing around me. When I stood up and looked outside, I saw Daniel and Clara walking by, hand in hand. They waved at me, and I waved back. It was a simple moment, but it felt profound, like a reminder that love doesn't vanish. It just moves from one heart to another, carrying the same light forward. That night, before going to bed, I sat on the porch and looked at the stars. I thought about my children, wherever they were. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a deep, peaceful hope that someday, when they were ready, they'd look at the same stars and think of home. And maybe, just maybe, they'd realize that their father's love had never left them. It had been shining above them all along, quietly guiding them back. It was late in the evening when I decided to take a walk down the old dirt road behind the house. The same road I used to walk with my children when they were small. The air was cool, carrying that faint smell of pine and earth after rain. Each step echoed with memories, small hands holding mine, laughter bouncing through the trees, questions about everything under the sun. Now, there was only the crunch of gravel beneath my boots and the rhythm of my own breathing. Still, I felt a strange peace, like the road itself was keeping me company. Halfway down the hill, I stopped by the fence where I had carved their initials years ago. The wood was worn, the letters barely visible, but I traced them with my fingertips anyway. It's funny how time erases things from sight, but never from the heart. As I stood there, I realized I wasn't mourning anymore. I wasn't waiting for the sound of a car pulling up the driveway or a phone call that would never come. I was simply grateful. Grateful that I got to love them, to raise them, to have been part of their story, even if my chapter had ended sooner than I'd hoped. That realization changed something inside me. For the first time, I didn't see myself as a man left behind. I saw myself as someone who had fulfilled his purpose. I gave them everything I could: love, guidance, shelter, and the quiet strength to stand on their own. Whether they ever came back or not no longer mattered as much as it used to. What mattered was that they carried a piece of me wherever they went. When I got back home, the sky had turned dark, and the stars had begun to scatter across it like tiny promises. I sat on the porch, listening to the crickets, and for the first time, I felt proud. Not of what I owned, but of what I gave. Love, even unreturned, still counts. It still matters. I thought of the box under the floorboards, my quiet secret. I knew that one day they would find it. Maybe it would be after I was gone. Maybe it would happen when they were searching for something else entirely. But when they opened it and found the letters, the money, the memories, they would finally see the truth. That their father hadn't left this world with resentment in his heart, but with peace. And when that day comes, I hope they smile. Not out of guilt, but out of love. I hope they understand that forgiveness was given long before they ever asked for it. Because love like this, the quiet, patient, unconditional kind, doesn't die. It simply waits, like the stars above the house, shining softly, guiding them home whenever they're ready to return. It was a cold afternoon when the lawyer called. His voice was calm, professional, almost too steady for the news he was about to give. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I just wanted to confirm that everything is in order with your will and the letters you left behind." I paused for a moment, looking out the window at the fading light. The world outside was still. The kind of stillness that makes you think about endings and what comes after them. I thanked him and hung up the phone. For a long while I just sat there, staring at the old floorboards under my feet, the same ones that hid the metal box I'd prepared for my children. Inside that box wasn't just money. It was the story of my life, written in pieces, old photographs, letters to each of them, and a small note that said, "When you find this, remember that love was always the real treasure." I had spent years wondering how they'd react when they finally opened it. Would they cry? Would they feel regret? Or would they smile, remembering that their father never stopped believing in them? I didn't know. And maybe it didn't matter. Because my part of the story, the waiting, the forgiving, the loving from afar, was coming to an end. It was time for life to teach them what words could not. That evening, I sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea. The flames flickered gently, casting golden light across the room. I could almost hear my wife's voice again, humming softly, as if she were there beside me. I whispered to her, "It's almost time." And in that moment, I felt no fear, just peace, because deep down, I knew that love, real love, never truly dies. It simply changes form, passing quietly from one heart to another, from one generation to the next. Before I went to bed, I took out one last letter. It was addressed not to my children, but to whoever would find it after them. It said, "If you are reading this, take care of the people you love while you still have the chance. Speak kindly, forgive quickly, and hold on to the ones who matter. Don't wait for time to teach you the value of what's already yours." I placed it inside the box, closed the lid, and covered it once more with the old wooden plank. Then I sat back in my chair, listening to the wind outside. It was whispering softly through the trees, almost like a lullaby. I smiled and said quietly, "It's in God's hands now." And for the first time in a very long time, my heart finally rested. The morning sunlight came through the curtains in thin golden lines, touching everything in the room with a soft glow. I opened my eyes slowly and sat up, feeling the weight of the years on my shoulders. My hands trembled a little as I reached for my glasses on the nightstand. Every movement felt deliberate, sacred even. There's something about getting older that makes you pay attention to small things. The sound of the kettle boiling, the smell of fresh air through a cracked window, the warmth of sunlight on your face. Life stops being about the things you don't have and starts being about what still remains. That morning I went outside and sat on the porch, the same place I had watched my children play when they were little. The wood creaked under me, old and familiar. The trees swayed gently, whispering the kind of wisdom only time can teach. For a moment, I imagined them there again, running, laughing, calling out, "Dad, look at me!" I could almost hear their voices carried by the wind, and for a heartbeat, it was like nothing had changed. I knew my time was drawing closer, not because of pain or sickness, but because the body has its ways of telling the soul. It's almost time to go home. But I wasn't afraid. I had lived through love, loss, laughter, and silence. I had forgiven and been forgiven. I had learned that life isn't measured in years, but in the moments that leave a mark on the heart. And even though my house was quiet, my memories were still alive, breathing in every corner. I looked out over the field and smiled, remembering something my wife once told me. When it's time for you to rest, don't look back. Everything you've loved will find its way back to you. Those words echoed inside me now, bringing comfort instead of fear. I whispered back to her, "I'm ready." Then I closed my eyes and listened, to the birds singing in the distance, to the leaves rustling softly, to the heartbeat of the earth beneath me. It felt like the world was saying goodbye in its own gentle way. I thought of my children, wherever they were, and I hoped that someday, when they found what I had left behind, they would feel this same peace. Because that's what I wanted for them. Not wealth, not guilt, not regret, just peace. The kind that comes when you realize love never truly ends. It only changes places. As I sat there, the sunlight grew warmer, wrapping around me like a quiet embrace, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I felt home. It was late in the afternoon when the knock came at the door. Soft, hesitant, almost uncertain. I wasn't expecting anyone. Visitors had become a rare thing in my life. For a second, I thought maybe it was Daniel or Clara stopping by, like they sometimes did. But when I opened the door, I froze. Standing there was my eldest son, Michael. He looked older, tired, the kind of tired that comes not from work, but from years of carrying something heavy inside. His eyes were glassy, uncertain, like he didn't know whether to step forward or turn away. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It felt as if time had paused, giving us one last chance to decide what to do with all the years we had lost. "Hi, Dad," he finally said, his voice trembling. I was in town. Thought I'd stop by." I just nodded, stepping aside so he could come in. The air between us felt fragile, like one wrong word could make everything collapse. We sat at the old kitchen table, the same one where I had once taught him to fix his first toy car, where his mother used to serve her Sunday soup. He looked around the house, quietly. like he was searching for ghosts. "It hasn't changed much," he said softly. "Neither have I," I answered with a faint smile. He tried to laugh, but it came out broken. And then, almost without warning, the silence broke. He lowered his head, and tears fell onto the table. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered, "for everything, for leaving, for the words I said, for forgetting you." I reached across the table, placed my hand over his, and said the only thing that mattered: "You were never forgotten." For a moment, we just sat there, father and son, two broken hearts slowly remembering how to beat together. The years between us melted away like snow under sunlight. No anger, no questions, no conditions, just forgiveness, simple and pure. When he finally lifted his head, I saw a glimpse of the boy he once was, the boy who used to run to me with muddy shoes and open arms. I realized then that love doesn't die with distance or time. It only hides, waiting for a moment like this to return. Before he left that evening, he hugged me tightly, longer than he ever had before. "I'll come back soon," he said. And as I watched him walk down that old dirt road, I felt something in my chest I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Quiet. Steady. Real. Because sometimes love doesn't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes it just needs the courage to knock softly on the door and say, "I'm home." That night, after Michael left, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the moonlight spill gently across the yard. The house felt different. Not empty anymore, just quiet, in a peaceful way. I kept replaying that moment at the door, the way he had looked at me, the way he said, "I'm sorry." Those two words had healed more than 1,000 apologies ever could. It was like something deep inside me had finally unclenched after years of holding on. I got up and made tea, just the way my wife used to, with a drop of honey instead of sugar. The smell brought her back to me for a second, and I smiled. For the first time in so many years, I didn't feel like a man waiting for life to end. I felt like a man who still had something left to live for. Forgiveness had opened a window in my soul, and fresh air was finally coming in. The next morning, I went out to the garden. The earth was cool and damp beneath my fingers as I pulled out the weeds that had grown wild over the years. It felt good, grounding, cleansing. As I worked, I remembered how my children used to help me plant tomatoes here when they were small. They'd get dirt all over their faces and laugh like it was the best thing in the world. I could almost hear them again. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. Love doesn't just live in people. It lives in places. It lingers in the spaces where laughter once was, waiting to be found again. I decided to plant something new that day. A small oak tree, right in the center of the yard. I thought, maybe when they come back, they'll see it and remember what we built together. The tree, still just a sapling, swayed gently in the breeze, and I whispered to it, "Grow strong. Be here long after I'm gone." That afternoon, as I sat on the porch, Daniel and Clara passed by again. They waved, and when they saw the tree, Daniel shouted, "Looks like new beginnings, huh?" I nodded, smiling. "Something like that." As the sun dipped behind the hills, I realized that life gives us many chances to start over. Sometimes through strangers, sometimes through forgiveness, sometimes through simple acts of planting hope in the soil of what once was broken. That night, before I went to bed, I opened one of the letters I'd written to my children years ago but never sent. I read it quietly, and for the first time I didn't feel the need to change a word. because everything I wanted to tell them about love, forgiveness, and second chances was already happening. Slowly, gently, like the roots of that little tree taking hold beneath the earth. And as I turned off the light, I whispered a prayer of gratitude. Because sometimes peace doesn't come in a grand moment of revelation. Sometimes it comes quietly, through a knock on the door, a shared cup of tea, and the simple act of believing that even broken things can grow again. The days that followed felt lighter, like the air itself had changed. For the first time in years, I woke up without that familiar weight pressing on my chest. The house still creaked, the clock still ticked, and the wind still whispered through the old trees. But now, the silence felt warm, not cold. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when the sky clears and everything smells like a new beginning. Every morning, I'd walk out to the garden and check on the little oak tree I had planted. It was growing fast, stronger, taller, as if it knew it was part of something sacred. Sometimes I'd sit beside it for hours, talking to it the way I once talked to my children when they were small. I'd tell it about the rain, about the memories, about the forgiveness that had finally taken root in my heart. "You'll stand longer than I will," I'd whisper, "but that's the point. You'll carry the story forward." A few weeks later, Michael came back. This time, he wasn't alone. His sister, Anna, was with him. When I saw them walking up the path together, my heart almost stopped. I didn't say a word. I just opened the door and let them in. There was no need for explanations, no speeches, no apologies. We just sat at the kitchen table, the three of us, letting the silence speak for us. Then Anna reached across the table and took my hand. "We found one of your letters, Dad," she said softly. "The one you wrote to Mom. It broke us and healed us at the same time." I felt tears well up, but I held them back, just nodding. "She'd be happy you came," I said quietly, and for a while it felt like she was there. In the way the light hit the window, in the way our laughter slowly returned, hesitant but real. We spent the whole afternoon talking, remembering, crying a little, laughing more. The years that had stolen so much from us began to give a little back. Later that evening, as they prepared to leave, Anna hugged me tight and said, "We'll come back soon. Next time, we'll bring the kids." I smiled and told her, "I'll be right here. Same porch, same stories." When they drove away, I watched their car disappear down the dirt road. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting everything in gold. And as I looked at the little oak tree swaying gently in the breeze, I felt something deep in my soul. The quiet, certain knowledge that love had come full circle. It didn't matter how much time had passed or how far they had gone. They came back. Not just to the house, but to me. And in that moment, I understood that forgiveness is not the end of the story. It's the bridge that leads us back home. The following Sunday felt different from any other day I'd lived in years. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and the smell of freshly cut grass drifted in through the open window. I woke up before the sun had fully risen and stood there, just watching the world wake up. The birds, the breeze, the faint light touching the hills. It all felt like a quiet celebration. For the first time in a long time, my heart wasn't longing for what was gone. It was grateful for what had found its way back. Around mid-morning, I heard footsteps outside, lighter, quicker, full of energy. When I opened the door, there they were again. Michael and Anna, and this time 2 little ones running ahead of them, laughing and chasing each other across the yard. My grandchildren. I hadn't seen them since they were babies. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just watched them, my throat tightening as tears filled my eyes. "Grandpa!" the smallest one shouted, running toward me. His voice, so innocent and pure, felt like music. He jumped into my arms without hesitation, and I held him close, breathing in that sweet smell of childhood. Soap, grass, sunshine. The kind of smell that reminds you what life is really about. Anna smiled from the porch, and I saw something in her eyes, the same softness her mother used to have. The house came alive again that day. The sound of laughter echoed through the rooms, bouncing off the old walls that had once known only silence. Toys scattered across the floor, little hands tugging at my sleeves, asking endless questions. I showed them the garden, the old tool shed, and finally, the oak tree. "I planted this not too long ago," I told them. "One day, it'll be big enough for you to climb." Their eyes widened with excitement, and I could see it, the spark of curiosity, the same one their parents once had. As the sun began to set, we all sat together on the porch, sharing stories. Michael told me about his business, Anna about her family, and I told them about the days when life felt heavier, and how Grace, little by little, had lifted it again. We didn't need to say the words, "I forgive you," or "I'm sorry," anymore. The love between us said it for us. When they finally left that night, the children waved from the car window, their tiny hands glowing in the last light of day. I watched them drive off, my heart full, not of sadness, but of peace. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered to my wife's photo on the nightstand, "They came back, just like you said they would." And for the first time since she left this world, I felt her presence not as a memory, but as warmth. I closed my eyes, and a tear rolled down, not from pain, but from gratitude. Because sometimes the love we plant takes years to bloom, but when it finally does, it fills the whole house with light. That night, after they left, I sat in the living room long after the lights went out. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, no longer heavy or hollow. It was peaceful, like the calm that follows a long, healing rain. I could still hear the echoes of laughter, the tiny footsteps running through the hallway, the sound of little voices asking, "Grandpa, tell us one more story." I smiled to myself. For years, that silence had been my greatest enemy. But now, it felt like a friend, a reminder of something beautiful that had returned. I walked over to the fireplace and looked at the old family photo hanging above it. The edges were faded, but the faces, they were all there. Me, their mother, Michael, and Anna, smiling as if time had never moved forward. I ran my fingers gently over the frame and whispered, "We made it, love. We really did." For a moment, I could almost feel her there beside me, her hand resting on mine, the way she used to do when words weren't needed. As I sat down in my chair, I began thinking about how everything had come full circle. I had spent so many years waiting for my children to return, but maybe it wasn't them who needed to come home. Maybe it was me. Maybe I needed to return to my own heart, to forgiveness, to the simple truth that love never fails. It only gets lost sometimes. I got up, opened a drawer, and took out the box of letters I had written all those lonely nights, the ones filled with the words I never said, the pain I never shared. I carried them outside and sat by the little oak tree under the moonlight. The air was cool, and the stars stretched endlessly above me. I opened one of the letters and began to read, not out loud, but in my heart. It was a letter to my wife, written years ago when the loneliness was unbearable. It said, "I don't know how to go on without you, but I'll try, for them." As I read, tears slid down my cheeks, but they felt different this time. Not bitter, not desperate, just clean, healing. I took a deep breath and said softly, "You were right. Love finds its way back, no matter how far it has to travel." Then, one by one, I folded the letters and placed them in a small wooden box beneath the oak tree, right beside its growing roots. It felt right, as if I was planting all the years of waiting, all the pain, into the soil of something new, something alive. When I went back inside, I glanced one last time at the photo on the wall. My heart was full, not of what I'd lost, but of what I'd found again. And as I turned off the lights, I whispered to the quiet, "Thank you for giving me one more chance to love." That night, for the first time in a lifetime, I slept with a smile. The morning after I buried the letters beneath the oak tree, the world felt strangely alive. The sky was painted in soft orange, the air smelled of wet soil, and a gentle mist floated over the fields. I sat on the porch, wrapped in a wool blanket, holding a cup of coffee that warmed my hands. Every breath felt new, as if the earth itself was breathing with me. For years, I had carried so much inside: sorrow, regret, loneliness, and now it was as if I had finally laid all of it to rest with those letters. As the sun climbed higher, I looked at the oak tree and smiled. Its tiny leaves shimmered in the light, swaying with a kind of confidence. It had grown taller overnight, or maybe I was just seeing it differently. I thought about how life works that way. Things grow quietly, without us noticing, until one day we realize how much they've changed. That tree was more than a plant now. It was a promise, a living symbol that love, when buried deep in forgiveness, always finds a way to grow. Later that morning, Daniel stopped by again. He brought fresh bread and honey, insisting I try his fiancée's new recipe. We sat together on the porch, eating and talking about nothing and everything: work, weather, life. He looked at me and said, "You seem lighter these days, Mr. Walker. Happier." I nodded and replied, "Because I finally stopped waiting for the past to come back. I realized it already did, just in a different way." He smiled and said, "That's beautiful." After he left, I spent the afternoon cleaning the house, not because it needed it, but because I wanted to. Every photo I dusted, every shelf I straightened, felt like reclaiming my space, not as a museum of what was lost, but as a home for what still mattered. I even baked a pie, the same kind my wife used to make on Sundays. The smell filled the kitchen, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like she was right there, humming that same old tune. As night fell, I went outside again and sat under the oak tree. The stars were out, thousands of them, scattered across the sky like pieces of every prayer I had ever whispered. I leaned back, looked up, and said quietly, "I did it. I kept my promise." There was no wind, no sound, just the faint rustle of leaves. And yet, I could feel something. Peace. Real, unshakable peace. It wasn't the kind that shouts or demands attention. It was the kind that lives deep inside, steady and sure. The kind that tells you you've done your part, that you can finally rest. Before going back inside, I placed my hand on the trunk of the young oak and whispered, "Grow strong. Keep our story alive." Then I turned off the porch light, letting the stars guide my steps. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a man reaching the end of his life. I felt like someone who had finally arrived. Home, in every sense of the word. A few weeks later, something beautiful started happening. Letters began to arrive. Real letters, with handwriting I recognized instantly. The first one came from Anna, written on soft cream paper that smelled faintly of lavender, just like her mother used to love. I opened it slowly, my hands trembling, and read her words as if they were a prayer. "Dad," she wrote, "I don't know if I'll ever be able to tell you in person what your letters meant to us. When Michael found them, we sat for hours reading them out loud. We cried, we laughed, and for the first time, we understood. You didn't just leave us money. You left us love, the kind that lasts. We never said thank you enough when you were there for us. So I'll say it now, from the deepest part of my heart. Thank you for never giving up on us." Tears blurred the words as I read them. I placed the letter on the table and covered it with my hand, whispering, "You don't owe me thanks, my girl. You were always enough." A week later, another letter arrived, this time from Michael. His handwriting was rough, uneven, like he'd struggled to find the right words. He wrote, "Dad, I found the old watch you gave me when I turned 16. I used to think it was just an old piece of metal, but now I understand why you gave it to me. To remind me that time is the only thing we can't get back. I wasted a lot of it being proud and angry, but I'm done with that now. I hope you can forgive me. I'm proud to be your son." I folded that letter gently and placed it beside Anna's. Then I just sat there for a long while, staring at both envelopes. My heart felt full in a way I hadn't known in decades. It was as if every word I'd ever spoken to them in silence had finally been heard. Over the following days, I received more. Drawings from my grandchildren, little notes that said things like, "We love you, Grandpa," and "We can't wait to see you again." I pinned them to the wall beside the old family photo. The house that had once echoed with emptiness was now filled with life again. Laughter, memories, and hope. Sometimes I'd sit by the window, letters spread out on the table, and think about how everything had come back to me in its own time. Not through money or possessions, but through words. Simple, honest, human words. And that's when I realized something powerful. The letters I had once written to heal my heart had now become seeds of healing for theirs. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields in gold, I whispered softly, "Thank you, Lord. You kept your promise." Because forgiveness had done what time could not. It had brought my family home, not just in body, but in spirit. And there, surrounded by those letters and laughter reborn, I finally understood the greatest truth of all. Love doesn't end with distance, or pride, or silence. It always finds its way back, written in ink, carried by grace, and sealed with forgiveness. It was early evening when I felt the first chill of autumn in the air. The sky was painted in shades of orange and violet, and the oak tree in the yard had grown taller than the roof of the house. Its branches stretched wide, proud and strong, like open arms holding the memories of everything that had happened here. I stood there for a long time, watching the leaves sway in the wind, and I thought to myself, this is what peace looks like. Not a moment, not a place, but a feeling that lives quietly inside you when you've finally made peace with the past. My children had come to visit often now. The house was alive again, filled with laughter, with stories, with the smell of coffee and fresh bread. Sometimes they'd bring the grandchildren, and I'd sit with them under the oak tree, telling stories about their mother, about the farm, about the times when their parents were little and used to get into trouble. They'd laugh, eyes wide with wonder, and I'd see my wife's smile reflected in theirs. It was like she was still here, woven into every sound, every breath, every heartbeat that filled this home. One afternoon, as we sat together, Anna asked me, "Dad, do you ever regret anything?" I thought about it for a while before answering. "Maybe a few things," I said, "but not enough to take away what I've learned. Regret is just love that stayed too long in the wrong place. I'd rather turn it into gratitude for the time we had, for the lessons, for the second chances." She nodded quietly, and I could tell she understood. As the days went on, I found myself writing again. Not letters this time, just small notes, reflections, prayers, words I hoped my family would one day read, not out of sadness, but as reminders. Love louder than your pride. Forgive faster than you speak. Never go to bed angry. Little truths carved from the pieces of my life. I hid them in books, in drawers, between the pages of photo albums, tiny echoes of wisdom waiting to be found when I was no longer here. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, I took one last walk through the garden. The air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. The oak tree stood tall, casting long shadows across the yard. I placed my hand on its trunk, feeling the pulse of life running through it. "You've done well," I whispered. "Keep growing. Keep standing for them when I no longer can." That night, as I sat by the fire, I realized I wasn't afraid of what was coming. Life had come full circle, from love to loss, from silence to forgiveness, from emptiness to peace. And somewhere along the way, I had learned the greatest lesson of all, that love, real love, never dies. It changes form. It moves through time. It finds new hearts to live in. So when I closed my eyes that night, I didn't think of endings. I thought of beginnings, of laughter under the oak tree, of children's hands in the soil, of stories being told long after I'm gone. Because if love is planted deep enough, it grows forever. And that's what I had done. Planted love and watched it bloom into eternity.